The first thing Emma Whitaker noticed was the smell of bacon drifting through the cold morning air, rich and sharp enough to make her empty stomach twist. The second thing she noticed was the man standing on the ranch porch with a rifle in his hands, watching her as if he had already decided she did not belong there. Emma tightened her grip on the small bundle of clothes under her arm and kept walking. The Texas wind pushed against her faded black skirt and tugged loose strands from the plain knot at the back of her neck. At 41, she had long ago stopped caring whether she looked tired, though the world insisted on reminding her. There were fine lines at the corners of her brown eyes now, and grief had taken the softness from her face. But there was still something steady in the way she carried herself, even after 2 days on foot and one freezing night in an empty shed. The ranch spread wide beneath the pale gold light of dawn. A weathered barn stood to the left, its red paint mostly gone. Corrals stretched behind it, filled with restless horses and a few cattle shifting in the dust. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, promising warmth, coffee, and maybe mercy if she was lucky. The man on the porch lowered the rifle, though not by much. "You lost, ma'am," he called. Emma stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked up at him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his late 30s or early 40s, with dark hair touched by sun and wind and a face that looked made by hard weather and harder silence. His jaw was rough with morning stubble. His eyes were gray, clear and cool and not unkind exactly, but guarded in a way that told her kindness had a price here. "No," Emma said. "I followed the smoke." One corner of his mouth twitched, though it was not quite a smile. "That usually means someone's lost." "It means someone's cold," she replied. "And hungry. Sometimes those things matter more." For the first time, his gaze sharpened with something like interest. Behind him, the screen door creaked open and a younger cowboy stuck his head out. He had red hair, a cheerful face, and the sort of energy that made a kitchen feel less empty. "Cole, if you're pointing that rifle at breakfast again, I'm leaving," he said. "I'm not pointing it at breakfast," the man answered without looking back. "I'm talking to a stranger." The red-haired cowboy noticed Emma then and straightened. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning." Cole rested the rifle against the porch rail and came down the steps. Up close, he was even more intimidating, not because he was cruel, but because he seemed like a man who had learned to survive by expecting trouble first and explanations later. "What do you want?" he asked. Emma swallowed, hating the weakness in that simple need. But pride had already cost her too much in life. Pride did not buy bread. Pride did not keep rain off your head. Pride did not bring your husband back from a fever grave or stop creditors from selling your dishes, while the earth was still fresh over him. "I'm looking for work," she said, "or shelter for a day. I can cook, clean, mend, whatever needs doing." His eyes dropped to her hands. They were chapped and red from travel, but not rough in the way frontier hands usually were. She saw him notice that and knew what he was thinking. Widow from somewhere softer. Woman too fine for ranch work. Another mistake walking on tired feet. "Can you now?" he said. "I can." He glanced at the bundle under her arm. "That all you own?" "It's all I brought this far." Something passed over his face then, gone too fast for her to name. He looked toward the rising sun, toward the bunkhouse, toward the kitchen window where the smell of bacon only seemed crueler now. "This isn't a boarding house," he said. "I didn't ask for comfort." His gaze came back to hers. "What did you ask for?" Emma lifted her chin. "A chance." The red-haired cowboy had come down from the porch by then. He leaned one shoulder against the post and looked between them with open curiosity. "She looks half frozen, Cole. She also says she can cook." Emma turned to him. "I can season beans, make biscuits, roast meat, stretch one chicken into supper for 6, and keep a kitchen from turning into a war zone. I can also make coffee that doesn't taste like boiled fence posts, which I suspect would be new around here." The younger cowboy barked a laugh before he could stop himself. Cole's expression did not change, but she saw the smallest shift in his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma Whitaker." "You married?" The The question landed like a stone, but Emma answered steadily. Widowed. How long? 11 months. He nodded once as if that explained something. Maybe to him it did. My name's Cole Harper, he said. This is Ben Lawson. We've got 9 men on this ranch, and the cook left 6 days ago after throwing a skillet at my foreman. Ben scratched the back of his neck. To be fair, Owen deserved the skillet. Owen deserved a smaller skillet, Cole said. Despite herself, Emma almost smiled. Almost, Cole noticed. His eyes lingered on her face for one quiet second too long. You really can cook? He asked again. Emma let out a breath. Mr. Harper, I once fed 14 church women and a visiting preacher with half a ham, stale flour, and a stove pipe that caught fire in the middle of supper. Nobody left hungry. Nobody even guessed the pie crust was burned. Ben's grin widened. I like her. Cole ignored that. And what do you want in return? A bed in a corner, food enough to earn my strength back, a little money when you can spare it. She hesitated, then forced the truth out plain. I need somewhere to stand before the world finishes knocking me down. The wind moved between them, dry and cool and full of dust. From the corrals came the sound of a horse kicking wood. Somewhere behind the house, a pot lid clattered. Morning was waking all around them, ordinary and busy, while Emma stood on the edge of one more turning point in a life that had already broken once too often. Cole looked at the house, then back at her. There's stew left from last night, he said. It's awful. If you can make it edible, I'll let you stay till Sunday. Emma blinked. That's your test. It's the first one. And the second. He folded his arms. Breakfast for 9 hungry cowboys in less than an hour. If they don't complain, you stay another week. Ben laughed under his breath. That's cruel, boss. Cole's mouth moved again, that near smile that never fully arrived. Ranch life's cruel. Best she learns early. Emma looked past him toward the warm kitchen window, then back at the man himself. There was challenge in him, but also something else. Not hope. Not yet, but maybe the memory of it. She straightened her shoulders. Show me the stove, she said. This time Cole Harper did smile just a little. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, stepping aside and opening the screen door. Let's see if you can season with laughter too. Emma followed Cole into the kitchen and stopped just inside the doorway. The room was bigger than she expected, but it had the worn look of a place built for work, not comfort. A long wooden table stood in the middle, scarred by years of knives, hot pans, and heavy hands. Shelves lined one wall, packed with mismatched plates, coffee tins, flour sacks, and jars of preserved peaches. The iron stove took up almost half the far side of the room, black and hot and temperamental just by the look of it. A pot of bacon grease sat nearby. A pan of burned biscuits rested on the counter like a warning. Emma set down her bundle and took in the rest with one quick sweep. No curtains. No flowers. No softness. A kitchen that fed people, yes, but did not love them. Ben leaned against the door frame, arms folded, watching her with cheerful interest. Cole moved toward the stove and lifted the lid on a pot. This is the stew, he said. Emma stepped closer and looked inside. The meat had been cooked to threads, the potatoes had nearly disappeared into the broth, and the whole thing smelled mostly of salt and regret. She lifted the spoon, tasted one careful sip, and had to fight not to make a face. Well, Cole asked. Emma set the spoon down. Did you mean for it to taste like old boots, or was that an accident? Ben laughed so hard he nearly choked. Cole only crossed his arms. Can you fix it? Emma moved at once, opening jars, checking shelves, glancing into the pantry. There's onion, garlic, dried thyme, good, flour, better, vinegar, that might save your life. She looked over her shoulder. Whoever cooked this last either hated all of you or had given up on earthly joy. That would be Owen, Ben said, and both may be true. Emma found a knife, tested the edge, and frowned. This blade is dull enough to spread jam. Cole took the knife from her, reached into a drawer, and handed her another. Try that. It was sharper. Not perfect, but usable. She chopped onions fast, added grease to a hot pan, and began to cook them down with garlic until the smell changed from bitter kitchen failure to something richer, something alive. She added flour for body, scraped in the sad remains of the stew, then a splash of vinegar and herbs. A little black pepper, a little patience. She worked without wasting motion, though her body ached from travel and lack of sleep. Cole stood near the stove, silent, watching everything. Most men watched women in kitchens with either dismissal or entitlement. Cole watched like a man measuring a storm line, careful, quiet, looking for what it meant. Emma did not know yet which was worse. Ben drifted closer, drawn by the smell. That already smells better. It should, Emma said. I'm fighting for its soul. The young cowboy grinned. I definitely like her. Cole ignored him. You always talk while you work. Emma stirred the pot slowly. Only when I'm tired, hungry, or being judged. And which one is it now? She glanced at him. All three. Something warm flickered in Ben's face, as if he had been waiting for that answer. Cole's expression stayed controlled, but his eyes changed again. Not softer exactly, just less closed. When the stew was done, she ladled a bowl and handed it to him. Well. Cole took the spoon and tasted. Emma waited. Ben waited louder. At last Cole swallowed. It no longer tastes like punishment. Ben grabbed the bowl from his hand and took his own bite. His eyebrows rose. Ma'am, if you can do this to stew, there may be talk of miracles. Emma reached for the flour sack. Then let us move on to breakfast before your miracle gets cold. For the next 40 minutes, the kitchen became a battlefield. Emma discovered very quickly that the stove truly did have moods. The left side burned hot enough to scorch bacon if she looked away. The oven heated unevenly. The biscuit dough fought her from the first turn because the flour was dry and the lard had gone too soft by the stove. She mixed and rolled and cut while bacon sizzled, coffee boiled, and eggs waited in a cracked blue bowl. Ben took orders cheerfully once he saw she meant business. He hauled wood, fetched water, and nearly dropped half the plates before she caught them. Careful, she snapped. Yes, ma'am. And stop smiling like this is entertainment. It is entertainment. It is breakfast, she said. Cole worked too, though more quietly. He adjusted the fire without needing to be asked, moved heavy pots with practiced ease, and once, when Emma reached too quickly for the kettle, caught the handle before the steam could burn her hand. His fingers brushed hers only for a second. It should have meant nothing. Instead, after 11 months of widowhood, of grief, of fear, of sleeping alone and speaking only when necessary, that brief human touch startled her more than the hot steam would have. She pulled her hand back at once. Thank you. He nodded once. Mind the kettle, it spits. Emma turned back to the dough before he could see that the color in her face had nothing to do with stove heat. The first of the cowboys came in just as she set the biscuits in the oven. Big men, dusty men. Men who smelled of horse and leather and cold morning air. They stopped short when they saw a stranger in a black dress standing at the stove. One of them blinked. Ben, where'd she come from? Front porch, Ben said. Another took off his hat. Morning, ma'am. Sit, Emma said without turning. Food's coming if the Lord is merciful and this stove doesn't kill me first. That earned a ripple of laughter. More men filed in, all curious, all hungry, all clearly aware that something unusual had happened while the sun was still rising. The last one through the door was older than the others, broad through the chest with a weathered face and kind eyes. He looked from Emma to Cole and understood enough without asking. This her? He said. Cole poured coffee. This is Mrs. Whitaker. The older man nodded respectfully. Owen Parker, foreman. Emma did not miss Ben's grin at the name. The skillet man. She asked. Owen blinked. Pardon. Never mind, she said. Take a seat. Breakfast hit the table in waves. Bacon first, crisp and hot. Then eggs, then biscuits golden enough to make Emma breathe easier. She split one open and saw the inside rise soft and clean. Thank God, gravy came last, thick and peppered and much better than she had feared. For a moment nobody spoke. Then the men began to eat. Emma stood near the stove with her hands clasped tight in her apron, trying not to watch too closely and failing. A man with dark hair reached for a second biscuit before finishing the first. Another dragged his plate back for more gravy. Owen took a bite, then another, then looked at Cole across the table. "Well," he said, "either I died in my sleep or the ranch just got saved." The room filled with rough laughter. Ben pointed with his fork. "I told you she was a miracle." Cole did not laugh as loudly as the others, but his gaze moved to Emma and stayed there. "No one's complaining," he said. "Not with their mouths full," Emma answered before she could stop herself. That made even Cole smile properly this time, and the sight of it changed his whole face. Not younger exactly, but lighter, like a door opening just a little in a house shut up too long. Owen lifted his coffee cup. "Mrs. Whitaker, if you can make gravy like this, you can stay here till spring for all I care." "Sunday first," Cole said. The men groaned. Emma, tired and aching and still standing in a strange kitchen with nowhere certain ahead of her, heard herself laugh. It came out rusty at first, unused, then fuller. The room stilled for the smallest second, not because they minded it, because it surprised them, maybe because it surprised her too. Cole looked at her in a way she could not read, something serious beneath the humor, something that made her chest tighten without permission. After the men left for the morning work, full and talking louder than before, the kitchen fell into a quieter mess of dirty plates, bacon grease, and flour dust. Emma began stacking dishes automatically. "You can stop," Cole said. She looked up. "Why?" "You passed the test." "That was only breakfast." "It was enough." Ben leaned against the table, grinning. "Nobody threatened violence. Around here, that counts as praise." Emma wiped her hands slowly on her apron. "So I stay till Sunday." Cole studied her for a long second, then glanced at the neat way she had already begun restoring order to the room, the biscuits wrapped in a towel, the coffee moved off the boil, the sink filling for dishes. "Make it a week," he said. Emma blinked. "A week. If you still want it." She should have answered at once, but something in his tone stopped her. It was not charity, she would have heard that and hated it. It was not softness either, it was caution with room inside it. "Yes," she said quietly, "I still want it." Cole nodded toward the hallway. "There's a small room off the kitchen. Last cook used it. It's yours for now. Ben will carry in water. Mrs. Doyle in town left some old quilts here last winter. They're clean enough." Ben pushed off the table, happy to help. Emma looked from one man to the other, and for one dangerous second she almost let relief show too clearly on her face. She lowered her eyes instead. "Thank you." Cole picked up his hat. "Don't thank me yet, supper matters too." Emma drew herself up. "Then I suppose you'd better come back hungry." He held her gaze one moment more than necessary. "I always do," he said, and walked out into the bright cold morning, leaving Emma standing in the kitchen with her heart doing something unwise and unfamiliar. By noon, Emma had learned 3 important things about the Harper Ranch. First, men could track half the prairie into a kitchen in under 10 seconds if no one stopped them. Second, the stove really did have a hateful streak. And third, Cole Harper carried silence the way other men carried sidearms, close, polished, and always ready. She spent the afternoon turning the kitchen into something she could survive inside. Ben brought in her small bundle and the promised quilts, along with a cracked wash basin and a bar of yellow soap. He chattered while he worked, the way some people whistle. "You'll want to latch that window at night," he said, setting the basin on a stool in the little room off the kitchen. "Wind gets mean after dark." Emma looked around. The room was narrow but clean, with a rope bed, one peg on the wall, and a small table beside the window. It was more than she had slept in for months. "I've slept in worse," she said. Ben glanced back at her with quick sympathy, but he was kind enough not to ask questions. "Well, now you won't have to." When he left, Emma stood alone in the little room for a moment, resting her hand on the quilt. "Now you won't have to." Such a simple sentence, and yet it nearly undid her. For 11 months, every place had been temporary. Every kindness had come with a price or pity tucked inside it. Since Henry died, the world had become a place where doors closed gently but firmly, where relatives spoke of burdens in soft voices, where church women pressed stale bread into her hands while quietly hoping she would move on. She sat on the edge of the bed only long enough to steady herself. Then she got back to work. The kitchen needed taming. She scrubbed the counters, sorted the pantry shelves, and found 3 different tins marked coffee, though only one actually held coffee. She moved the flour farther from the stove, tied herbs in bundles by the window, and threw out a jar of pickles that had gone soft enough to frighten her. By the time she started supper, the room already felt less like a station house for hungry men and more like a place where someone lived. She chose something safer than biscuits this time. Beef braised slowly with onions, carrots, and thick gravy, corn cakes in the skillet, apples stewed down with a little sugar and cinnamon she found wrapped in paper at the back of the shelf. She worked steadily, her sleeves rolled, her hair slipping loose in wisps around her face. Late in the afternoon, the back door opened and Cole stepped in carrying a crate of supplies. He stopped when he saw the windowsill. Emma had placed there a small chipped cup holding dried grass and 2 yellow prairie flowers Ben had tossed aside on the back step. "It was bare," she said before he could speak. "I fixed it." Cole set down the crate. "I can see that." His eyes moved around the room, to the sorted shelves, the folded clean towels, the swept floor, the herbs hanging by the window. "You reorganized my kitchen." Emma lifted her chin. "Was it organized before?" He looked at her for a long second. "No," he admitted. She turned back to the stove, hiding a smile. "Then you're welcome." For a moment he said nothing. Then she heard the creak of the chair by the table. When she glanced over, he had sat down, hat in his hands, elbows on his knees, just watching the room. Most men took kitchens for granted. They sat, they ate, they left. Cole looked at this one as if he could not quite decide what had changed but knew it had. "How long were you married?" he asked quietly. The question came so suddenly that Emma almost dropped the spoon. She kept stirring. 19 years. Was he a good man? She thought of Henry's gentle laugh, his careful hands, the way he used to hum over ledgers at night and tuck cold feet under the blanket to warm them against her legs. She also thought of the sickness that had hollowed him out in less than 2 months. The debt he never meant to leave her, the pharmacy bills, the borrowed money, the coffin too plain for the man he had been. "Yes," she said at last, "he was." Cole nodded slowly as if that mattered. "I was married too," he said. Emma turned then. The words sat between them like something living. Ben had mentioned nothing, neither had Owen. No woman's things had remained in the house, no photographs in sight, no signs at all except perhaps the deep quiet that had settled into the walls. "What happened?" Emma asked softly. Cole looked down at his hands. "Influenza 3 winters ago." His mouth tightened. "My wife, my little girl, both in the same week." Emma felt the room tilt for just a second. No wonder the house had forgotten softness. No wonder he moved through it like a man who expected every chair, every doorway, every room to remind him of something gone. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it more than most condolences she had ever spoken. He gave one small nod. "So am I." Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The stove crackled. A spoon tapped the pot. Wind pressed softly at the window, the kind of quiet that was not empty, only full of things too large to say all at once. At last Emma cleared her throat. "Did she cook?" A faint change touched his face. "No." Emma blinked. "No." Cole almost smiled. Lena could burn water, thought salt was a personal insult, but she laughed every time she ruined supper, and somehow that made the meal feel less ruined. Emma looked back at the pot before him. "That explains your condition for employment." He watched her carefully. "What condition?" She met his eyes. "That I season with laughter too." Something passed between them then, small and quiet and unmistakably human. "Yes," he said, "that one." Before she could answer, the back door burst open and Ben came in carrying firewood under one arm and news under the other. "Storm coming," he announced. Owen says we've got maybe 2 hours before it hits. Cole stood at once. How bad? Bad enough that Frank and Jesse are bringing in the horses early. Emma moved to the window. The sky in the west had darkened while she cooked, thick gray clouds piling up low and heavy over the fields. Cole was already issuing orders. Tell Owen I want the stock moved to the lower sheds. And bring in every loose tool you see. Last windstorm cost me half a roof. Ben nodded and hurried back out. Emma turned from the window. What do you need from me? Cole paused as if unused to being asked that in a tone that assumed usefulness instead of helplessness. Get supper ready sooner, he said. If the men come in soaked, they'll need hot food fast. Coffee too, a lot of it. Emma tied her apron tighter. Then stop standing there and bring me more wood. This time the smile came easier. Yes, ma'am, he said. The next 2 hours moved hard and fast. Wind rattled the walls. The sky darkened to iron. Men pounded in and out through the back door with muddy boots, armloads of tack, and shouted half-sentences. Emma kept the stove full and the coffee hotter than reason. She made extra gravy, sliced bread thick, set towels near the door. By the time the first hard drops of rain hit the roof, supper was nearly ready. Then a crash sounded from outside, loud enough to shake the kitchen windows. Emma jumped. Cole was at the door in an instant, wrenching it open against the wind. Ben ran through the rain toward the house, soaked through already, his red hair plastered to his head. Fence line came down by the south pasture, he shouted. 2 horses got loose. Owen's after one. The other bolted toward the creek. Cole reached for his coat. I'll get it. Emma turned from the stove. In this. He was already pulling on gloves. If that horse breaks a leg in the dark, we lose it. Then take someone. Everyone else is already out. He headed for the door. Emma did not think. She simply crossed the room and caught his sleeve. He stopped. For one suspended heartbeat, the storm seemed to vanish. The kitchen, the men, the rain, all of it gone under the shock of her hand on him and his eyes dropping to it. Be careful, she said, hating how thin her voice sounded. Cole looked at her as if he had forgotten just for a second how to move. Then he covered her hand briefly with his own. I will, he said, and he was gone into the storm. The door slammed behind him. The room seemed larger at once and colder. Emma stood there for one foolish second, staring at the place where he had been. Then the pot boiled over and snapped her back to herself. She threw herself into work with both hands. Men began returning in groups, wet and tired and cursing the weather. She fed them as fast as they came. Owen returned with one horse and a torn sleeve. Frank came in limping. Ben carried in buckets and looked toward the door every few minutes without meaning to. No one said it, but they were all listening for Cole. The storm worsened. Rain hammered the roof in sheets. Wind moaned down the chimney. Once, the lantern by the sink flickered so hard Emma thought it might go out. Still no Cole. She told herself not to watch the door, then watched it anyway. At last, nearly an hour after he had ridden out, they heard hooves in the yard. The room came alive at once. Ben pulled the door open just as Cole stepped in, drenched from hat to boots, one hand on the reins of the terrified bay mare he had gone after. For a moment Emma only saw that he was standing, whole, breathing, alive. The relief that rushed through her was so sharp it made her angry. Cole handed the reins off and came inside, rainwater dripping onto the floor. He looked toward the stove first, toward the men second, and then finally toward Emma. She had intended to say something cool and sensible. Instead, what came out was, "You absolute fool." The room went still. Ben looked delighted. Cole blinked once, rain still running down his face. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Emma said, stepping toward him. "That horse was not worth breaking your neck in a flood." A few of the men tried and failed not to smile. Cole closed the door behind him. "She was worth enough to try. And if you had not come back." His gaze held hers. The answer to that was too large, too dangerous. So he only said more quietly, "But I did come back." Emma opened her mouth, closed it again, and shoved a towel at his chest with more force than necessary. "You're dripping on my floor," she muttered. For the first time since she had met him, Cole Harper laughed. Not the near smile, Not the almost laugh she had seen once or twice before, a real laugh, low and rusty and surprised by its own existence. The room changed with it. The men grinned. Ben outright beamed. Even Owen shook his head as if witnessing something he had not expected to see again. Cole took the towel, still looking at Emma in a way that made her pulse stumble. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She turned back to the stove before the whole ranch saw too much on her face. But as she ladled out hot gravy and heard his laugh echo once more behind her, Emma knew something had shifted. It was still small, still uncertain, still wrapped in grief and caution and all the old hurts both of them carried. But it was there, and no storm on earth was going to make her pretend otherwise. By the next morning, the storm had blown itself east, leaving the ranch washed clean and strangely bright. Sunlight lay across the yard in pale gold bands. Water still dripped from the barn roof. The creek would be running high for days. But the worst had passed, and with it something else seemed to have loosened inside the house. Emma felt it the moment she stepped into the kitchen before dawn. The room no longer felt borrowed. The stove answered more kindly under her hands. The floorboards knew her step now. Even the shelves, still rough and uneven, looked less like a stranger's problem and more like part of a life she had begun building one meal at a time. She mixed biscuit dough while the sky was still dark, tied on her apron, and tried not to think about the way Cole had laughed the night before. Tried even harder not to think about the way his hand had closed over hers before he rode into the storm. She failed at both. "You're smiling at flour," Ben said from the doorway. Emma nearly dropped the spoon. "Must you appear like a ghost before sunrise?" Ben grinned and reached for a tin cup. "Only when something interesting is happening." "Nothing interesting is happening." "Mummy." Emma narrowed her eyes. "Careful, Mr. Lawson, I control the gravy." Ben lifted both hands in surrender. "I'm just saying the boss laughed last night." "He is allowed." "He has not laughed like that in 3 years." Her hands stilled for half a second before she forced them moving again. "Then, perhaps your standards for entertainment are too low." Ben only smiled into his coffee. The men came in hungry and loud, full of storm stories and fence-line complaints. Emma fed them all while pretending not to notice that Cole took his usual seat but looked at her more often than the others did. Not openly. Not long, just enough to unsettle her. After breakfast, Owen stayed behind while the younger men headed out. He stood by the stove warming his hands around a coffee cup, his old eyes thoughtful. "You settled in fast." Emma scraped the skillet clean. "Necessity helps." Owen nodded slowly. "It does." He seemed about to say more, then glanced toward the yard where Cole was speaking to 2 riders by the corral. "Boss was a different man before," he said quietly. "After he lost Miss Lena and the little one, he stopped looking at tomorrow. Just worked, ate, slept, kept going because the ranch needed him." Owen's weathered face softened. "Then you walked in with your black dress and sharp tongue and started bossing all of us around." Emma looked down before he could read too much in her face. "I did no such thing." Owen snorted. "Mrs. Whitaker, yesterday you told Frank Mason to wipe his boots or eat outside like a stray dog." "He was muddy. He was terrified." That pulled a laugh from her before she could stop it. Owen smiled into his cup. "Good, keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Making this place sound alive." Before Emma could answer, the back door opened and Cole stepped in. Owen gave him one long look, one Emma could not quite decipher, then set down his cup and moved out without a word. Cole watched him leave. What did he say? Emma kept her attention on the sink. "That Frank is frightened of me." "As he should be." She glanced up despite herself, and there it was again, that quiet humor in him that had not been there on the first morning. He stepped farther into the kitchen. No hat this time. His dark hair was still damp at the temples from washing at the pump. He looked tired. The storm and broken fencing had cost him sleep. But there was something gentler in his face too, something that made her cautious in a way no hard stare ever had. "You should eat," she said. "I already did." "Properly." "I had coffee." Emma pointed with the spoon. "That is not breakfast." Cole looked at her for a moment, then obediently sat at the table like a schoolboy brought to heel. It should not have pleased her as much as it did. She set down eggs, leftover biscuits, and bacon she had kept warm. He waited until she placed the plate in front of him, then said quietly, "Thank you. You work better fed." "I imagine I do most things better fed now." The words were simple, but the way he said them was not. Emma busied herself with wiping the counter. "You were lucky last night." "I know. You might have been thrown in the dark." "I know. You might have drowned at the creek crossing." He laid down his fork. "Emma." It was the first time he had said her name without title or formality. She went still. Cole looked at her steadily across the table. "Were you worried?" There were 100 possible answers, most of them safer than the truth. Instead, she said, "You are very inconvenient to cook for if dead." A slow smile touched his mouth. "That worried then?" Emma turned away before he saw too much. The day passed under a sky so clear it almost seemed cruel after the storm. Emma washed sheets, aired quilts, and set a loaf of bread to rise in the window. By afternoon she had also mended 3 shirts, stitched a tear in a saddle blanket, and discovered that one of the hens had laid eggs under the porch steps as if hiding treasure. She was carrying a basket of dry laundry from the line when she saw the rider coming hard from the road. At once she knew something was wrong. The horse was lathered. The man bent low in the saddle. Dust flew behind him in a desperate trail. Cole and Owen both turned from the corral as the rider reached the yard. It was Samuel Pierce from the neighboring ranch, pale under his dust. "Cole," he called, not even dismounting first. "It's Mary. She's taken bad. Fever, shaking, barely breathing. Doc's in Willow Creek with a busted leg and can't ride. My place is 7 miles west." Emma had already started toward them before she realized it. Samuel saw her then. This the widow folks were talking about, the one who set Will Morrison's hand in town last spring. Emma blinked. "I never set anyone's hand in town." Samuel frowned. "Then maybe I got the story wrong." Cole had turned toward her fully now. "Emma." She understood at once what he was asking without him needing to say it. "Can you help?" Her stomach tightened. "I nursed my husband through fever," she said quietly. "I know basic care. Cool water, broths, poultices, but I'm no doctor." "Mary don't need a doctor to save her today," Samuel said roughly. "She needs somebody who knows what to do before she gets worse." Cole took one step closer. "You don't have to go." Emma looked from one man to the other, then toward the west where the road disappeared into bright distance. Somewhere out there a woman was struggling to breathe, maybe frightened, maybe alone except for a desperate husband riding too fast between ranches. No, she thought, not alone, not if she could help it. "I'll go," she said. The next half hour moved in a rush. Emma packed willow bark, clean cloths, extra blankets, and the last jar of preserved peaches, because fevered people sometimes took sweetness when they refused anything else. Ben saddled the gentlest mare on the ranch. Owen tied a medicine box behind the seat. Cole said little, but his silence this time was tight, full of things held back. When Emma came out with her shawl pinned and her skirts gathered for riding, he was waiting by the horse. "You'll ride with Samuel," he said. "Ben goes too." Emma nodded. Cole looked as though that answer was not enough. Finally he said, more quietly, "If she worsens, come back before dark. Roads won't be good after sundown. Parts of the creek are still high." "I know." "Do you?" Emma met his eyes. "I know you're worried." His jaw shifted. "Yes." There it was again, truth plain and unguarded when it mattered most. Emma softened despite herself. "I'll be careful." He helped her into the saddle with both hands at her waist, steady and warm. For a moment she sat above him and saw his face turned up toward hers, all that restraint and all that feeling he kept pressed down beneath it. "Come back," he said. Not a command, not even a request, something deeper, something that reached under her ribs and stayed there. "I will," she answered. The Pierce ranch was smaller than Harper's and lonelier too, tucked beside a line of cottonwoods near the creek. Mary Pierce lay upstairs under 3 quilts, her face flushed deep red, hair damp against her temples. The room smelled of sickness and fear. Emma took over at once. She cooled cloths, made Mary sip broth, got the window open just enough for fresh air, and sent Samuel and Ben out of the room every time they started pacing too loudly. By late afternoon, the woman's fever had stopped climbing, though it remained high. The worst danger had eased for now. Samuel nearly wept with relief. "You saved her," he whispered. Emma shook her head. "No, her strength did that. I only helped." But when she sat at Mary's bedside in the dimming room and felt the woman's breathing settle into something less ragged, Emma knew a deeper truth had settled too. For too long she had thought of herself as what remained after loss. Henry's widow, the poor relation, the woman asking for work. But here, with a sick wife sleeping easier because of her hands, she felt something shift cleanly into place. She was not only surviving, she was still of use, still strong. Still someone people could trust in their worst hour. That realization steadied something in her soul that grief had nearly broken. By the time they started back, the sun had dropped low and red. Ben rode ahead. Samuel insisted on sending a sack of cornmeal and 2 hens in thanks. Emma protested and lost. The road home glowed copper under the last of the light. Cole was waiting in the yard, not on the porch, not by the barn, in the yard itself, as if he had been standing there long enough to wear a track in the earth. He came forward the moment they rode in. Ben barely had time to swing down before Cole was at Emma's side, reaching up to help her from the saddle. His hands settled at her waist again, but this time neither of them moved away quickly. "How is she?" he asked. "Still fevered, but better. I think she'll pull through." Relief crossed his face so fast and so openly it almost undid her. "She should rest," Ben said brightly, grinning far too much for an innocent man. "Long day." Emma could have cheerfully struck him with the cornmeal sack. Instead, she let Cole lead her toward the house. His hand stayed lightly at her back all the way to the kitchen door. Inside, the room was warm, lamps already lit. Someone had kept the stove going. Supper sat covered on the back of the range. The sight of it touched her more than it should have. "I saved you a plate," Cole said. Emma looked at him. "You." He looked suddenly almost embarrassed, which on him was such a rare thing it stole her breath a little. "Owen told me what to do, mostly." She crossed to the table, lifted the cloth and found roast chicken, warm biscuits and stewed apples. "It looks edible," she said carefully. His mouth shifted. "High praise." She sat too tired to stand on pride. Cole poured coffee and took the chair opposite her, but he did not eat. He only watched as if making sure she was real and back and whole. At last Emma set down her fork. "Cole." "Yes." "You are staring." "Yes." The plain honesty of it made her pulse jump. She folded her hands. "Why?" He leaned back slowly, as if there was no longer any point pretending. "Because when you rode away this afternoon," he said quietly, "I realized this place no longer feels the same when you are not in it." The kitchen seemed to go silent around them. Emma could hear the clock near the hallway, the low crackle of wood in the stove, her own breathing. Cole's gaze never left hers. "I told myself it was only because you cook better than Ben," he went on. "Then I told myself it was because the men are happier and Owen stops complaining when there's pie." One corner of his mouth lifted, but his voice remained low and steady. "But that is not the reason." Emma's fingers tightened together in her lap. "What is?" His answer came without hesitation. "You." The word landed softly and changed everything. She looked down then, because if she did not, he would see too much. All the fear, all the hope, all the wild and dangerous tenderness already growing in places she had thought dead. "I buried a husband less than a year ago," she whispered. "Some days I still wake expecting to hear him cough. Some days I feel guilty for laughing here." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, came around the table and crouched beside her chair. Emma looked up. There was nothing hurried in his face, nothing selfish, Only patience and something strong enough to be trusted. I know, he said. I am not asking you to forget him. The gentleness in that nearly broke her. I loved Lena, he continued. I will always love the life we had. Losing that does not make what I feel now false, and loving again would not make your first love any less real either. Emma could not speak. Cole rested one hand on the edge of her chair, close enough to reach for her and yet not touching without permission. I am only saying this, he said softly. You matter here, to this ranch, to the men, to me, and I am done pretending otherwise. Her eyes burned. So much of widowhood was emptiness, silence. The world acting as if your heart had become a finished thing, broken once and no longer meant to open. Yet here was this man, weathered and careful and steady as old oak, looking at her as if she were not finished at all, as if she were still becoming. Emma let out a breath she had not known she was holding. I do not know what comes next, she admitted. Cole's eyes softened. Neither do I. That more than any grand promise made her trust him, because it was true. At last she lifted her hand and set it over his. It was a small thing, a beginning, but Cole went still under her touch as if it meant the whole world. Then, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, perhaps we learn it slowly. His fingers turned beneath hers, warm and rough and careful. Slowly, he agreed. And in the golden light of the kitchen, with supper cooling forgotten on the table and the whole wide ranch settling into evening around them, Emma felt something she had not let herself feel in nearly a year. Not safety. Not exactly. Something braver. The first fragile, impossible shape of hope. Winter came down hard on the Harper ranch. By the second week of December, frost edged every fence post at dawn, and the water pail near the back step formed a thin sheet of ice each night. The fields turned pale and still under the cold. Wind moved through the dry grass with a lonely sound that made the whole world feel larger and emptier than before. But inside the kitchen, warmth held. Emma stood at the stove one gray morning, rolling cinnamon dough while coffee simmered and bacon popped in the skillet. Her sleeves were pushed back. A loose strand of hair had fallen against her cheek. The windows now wore simple checked curtains she had made from old feed sacks. A little jar of winter cedar sat on the sill. The room smelled of bread and spice and wood smoke, and the kind of life that builds itself slowly without asking permission. She had been at the ranch nearly 7 weeks, long enough to know which floorboard by the pantry squeaked, long enough to know Ben sang badly when he chopped wood, long enough to know Cole took his coffee black in the morning but sweeter after supper when he thought no one noticed. Long enough for the ranch to begin feeling less like a place she had arrived at and more like a place that had made room for her. Still, she and Cole had kept their promise. Slowly. There had been no grand declaration since that evening at the table, no reckless touching, no talk of forever spoken too quickly out of loneliness or need. Instead, there were small things, honest things. He carried water buckets without being asked when her back ached. She mended the cuff of his work coat in the evenings, while he did ranch accounts by lamplight. He walked her to church in Willow Creek on Sundays and stood beside her so naturally that people had started smiling at them before either of them had quite decided what they were together. He found a rocking chair in the barn loft, repaired the broken runner, and set it by the kitchen stove because he had noticed she rubbed one knee after long days. She baked him molasses cookies from memory because one afternoon he had mentioned his mother used to make them in winter. Nothing dramatic, nothing foolish. Only the daily quiet building of trust. Then Christmas week arrived and with it trouble. Emma was kneading bread just before supper when she heard shouting in the yard. Not playful shouting, sharp, urgent. She dropped the dough and ran to the door. 2 riders were coming in fast through the gate. One was Owen. The other she did not recognize at first because he was nearly falling from the saddle. When they got closer, she saw blood on his shirt. Ben burst from the barn at the same moment. What happened? Fence wire snapped, Owen called. Caught Luke across the side when his horse shied. The wounded man made a rough sound low in his throat as Owen and Ben helped him down. Emma moved before anyone else could speak. Bring him inside. Table, now. Within seconds, the kitchen was no longer a kitchen but a place of emergency again. Luke Mercer was only 22, broad-shouldered and usually quick to grin. Now his face was gray with pain. Blood soaked the side of his coat and one sleeve where he had pressed his hand against the wound. Cole came in behind them, took one look, and crossed to Emma at once. "What do you need?" There was no panic in him, no wasted motion, just that same steady readiness she had seen before. "Boiling water," she said. "More lamps, whiskey, clean cloth." He turned and gave orders. Emma cut through Luke's shirt with kitchen shears and saw the injury clearly. The wire had sliced across his ribs, deep but not as deep as it could have been, thank God. If it had gone lower or cleaner between the bones, they would have been burying him by Sunday. "It hurts," Luke gasped. "I know," Emma said, her own voice calm though her heart hammered. "You are going to stay still and let me work." She cleaned the wound while he clenched his teeth and swore. Owen held his shoulders. Ben turned pale at the first sight of blood and nearly backed into the stove. Cole stayed at Emma's left side, handing her whatever she asked for before she finished asking. At one point, Luke flinched so hard that the basin nearly tipped. Cole leaned over him and said in a voice low enough to settle horses, "Breathe, son. Mrs. Whitaker's got you." The trust in that simple sentence steadied Emma more than anything else could have. She stitched the cut with hands that no longer shook the way they had the first time. She packed and bandaged it, then stepped back at last. "He'll live," she said quietly. The whole room seemed to breathe again. Luke laughed weakly, then winced. "That's the best news I've had all day." Emma pressed a cup of water into his hand. "Then do not ruin it by moving." As the men carried him to the settle near the stove, where he could be watched through the night, Ben let out a long breath. "You save folks and suppers with the same face," he said. "It's unsettling." Emma sank into the nearest chair for just 1 second, suddenly aware of the weight in her limbs. Cole crouched beside her at once. "You all right?" She nodded once. Then, because he was close and because the room was full and because fear always made truth slip through faster than pride, she whispered, "I am tired of losing people." His face changed. Without thinking, he touched the back of her hand, just once, brief and grounding and full of understanding. "You won't lose this one," he said. She believed him. That night snow began to fall. At first it came softly, drifting past the windows like ash. By midnight it had thickened into a hard white curtain, blanketing the yard, the fence posts, the corrals, the whole world beyond the kitchen in cold silence. The ranch hands bedded down where they could. Luke slept fitfully on the settle. Owen took the first watch, but Emma woke before dawn and found Cole already in the kitchen, putting fresh wood on the fire. He turned when she came in wrapped in her shawl. "You should be sleeping." "So should you." He gave a tired half smile. "Luke's fever stayed down. I thought you'd want to know." Emma let out the breath she had been carrying in her sleep. "Thank you." Cole poured coffee and handed her a cup. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the lamps burned low and golden. For a while they stood without speaking. Then Cole said quietly, "Come with me." Emma blinked. "Where?" "Porch." "In this weather?" He took her cup before she could protest, set both mugs on the table, and reached for her coat from the peg. There was something in his face she had not seen before. Not tension, not uncertainty, decision. He helped her into the coat, his hands careful at her shoulders, then opened the back door. The cold hit them at once, sharp enough to steal breath. Snow covered the porch in a white sweep. The fields beyond had vanished into morning mist. The world seemed hushed, waiting. Emma pulled the coat close. "Cole, if this is your way of freezing me to death after breakfast, I object." He laughed softly, then turned to face her fully. "No," he said. "This is my way of asking you something before I lose my nerve." She went very still. Snow caught in his dark hair and on the shoulders of his coat. His gray eyes were clear and serious and more open than she had ever seen them. "Emma, I did not expect this," he said. "Not after Lena, not after the years since. I thought that part of my life was done. I thought work was enough. Silence was enough. Surviving was enough." He swallowed once. "Then you walked into my yard asking for shelter and insulted my stew." Despite herself, she smiled. His mouth moved too, but only faintly. You brought life back into this house before I even understood how empty it had become. You gave the men something to come home to. You gave me something to hope toward. Emma felt her eyes burn at once. Cole reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. It is not much, he said. I had no chance to go to town. I did not want to wait anyway. He unfolded the cloth. In his palm lay a ring, simple gold, worn smooth with age, beautiful not because it was grand but because it had been loved before. It was my mother's, he said softly. My father gave it to her when all he owned worth speaking of was 20 acres and one stubborn mule. She used to say the ring mattered less than the hand that stayed steady beside yours. He looked at Emma as if there were no one else in the world. I cannot promise an easy life. You know that already. This ranch asks much. Winter is hard, drought comes, cattle die, people fail each other sometimes. But if you will have me, I can promise truth, partnership, respect, a home that is as much yours as mine, and all the laughter I know how to keep. Emma could not speak. For one terrible second she feared she might cry so hard she would shame herself forever. Cole's voice dropped lower. Emma Whitaker, will you marry me? The question settled into the white morning like something holy. She thought of Henry then, not with guilt this time, but with gratitude. A good man, a true love, a life that had been real, gone, yes, but not erased. And because it had been real, she knew what goodness looked like now when it stood in front of her in the snow with trembling hands and honest eyes. She thought of the woman she had been when she first arrived. Hungry, proud, exhausted. Certain that the rest of life would only be endured, never cherished. And she thought of this kitchen, this ranch, this man, of the way he had listened, of the way he had waited, of the way he had never once asked her to become smaller than her grief. Emma let out one shaking breath. Yes, she whispered. Cole stared at her as if he had not trusted hope enough to expect it. Then she laughed through tears and said it stronger. Yes, Cole, I will. The look on his face then was worth every hard mile that had brought her west. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands not nearly as steady as he would have liked. It fit as if it had been waiting for her. Then he cupped her face, giving her every chance to step back. Emma did not step back. When he kissed her, it was warm despite the snow, gentle despite all the months of longing held in check. A kiss shaped by patience, by grief survived, by hope finally spoken aloud. When they parted, both of them were breathing hard in the freezing air. You're crying, he murmured. So are you. I am not. You are standing in a snowstorm proposing with your mother's ring. You are absolutely crying. That made him laugh, and Emma thought with a rush of joy, there it is. That sound. I get to keep hearing that sound. The back door burst open behind them so suddenly that they sprang apart. Ben stood there holding a coffee pot and grinning like a fool. Owen loomed just behind him with Luke, who looked weak but deeply interested. Well, Ben said. About time. What? Cole closed his eyes briefly. Were you spying? Listening, Ben corrected, very respectfully. Owen folded his arms. He means no. He was pressed against the window like a child at a candy shop. Luke lifted a hand from his blanket. Did she say yes? Emma held up her left hand. The cheer that followed shook snow from the porch roof. Ben nearly dropped the coffee pot. Owen actually smiled wide enough to show teeth. Luke declared that nearly bleeding to death had been worth it just to witness the moment, which earned him a scolding from Emma and a swat from Owen. By breakfast, the whole ranch knew. By noon, so did half of Willow Creek, because Ben had ridden to town for supplies and apparently considered private news a burden too heavy to carry alone. Mrs. Doyle sent over a ham. Samuel Pierce delivered 2 jars of preserves and a note saying Mary was on her feet and dancing with joy. The preacher sent word that if the weather held, he would come out Christmas Eve. Emma should have felt overwhelmed. Instead, she felt strangely calm, as if something that had been wandering inside her for months had finally sat down and found its home. The wedding came 4 days later in the main room beside the kitchen, because the weather was too sharp for the church, and because neither of them wanted distance between the life they lived and the vows they made. Snow still lay thick beyond the windows. Pine branches decorated the doorway. Emma wore a dark blue dress Mrs. Doyle altered for her in one rushed day, and a white shawl Owen's late sister had once crocheted. Cole stood waiting near the fire in his best black coat, looking solemn enough to face judgment and tender enough to undo her where she stood. Ben cried first, then Luke, who claimed dust in the room. Then, to Emma's amazement, Owen cleared his throat so many times during the vows that she thought he might choke. The preacher spoke simply. Of second mercies, of homes built after storms, of love that does not erase what came before but honors it by teaching the heart to live again. When Cole took her hand and said, "I choose you, Emma, for every season God gives us," she had to blink hard to see him clearly. When she answered, "And I choose you, Cole, in hunger and in plenty, in sorrow and in laughter," her voice shook but did not break. The kiss that made them husband and wife sent up such a noise from the ranch hands that the preacher himself laughed. The supper afterward was loud and warm and imperfect in all the right ways. Emma had cooked half of it because she refused not to, though Mrs. Doyle and Mary Pierce scolded her the entire time. There was roast chicken, beef, biscuits, beans, spiced apples, and 2 pies that vanished so quickly Ben accused Owen of theft. At some point during the evening, while music rose rough and happy from Ben's fiddle, Cole found Emma standing alone for one brief moment in the kitchen doorway watching the room. "You all right?" he asked softly. She looked out at the men laughing around the table, at Luke healthy enough to be teasing Ben again, at Mary Pierce smiling over her cup, at Owen pretending not to enjoy himself, at the firelight, the noise, the warmth, the life of it all. Then she looked at the man beside her, her husband. "Yes," she said, "more than all right." Cole slipped one arm around her waist. "What are you thinking?" Emma rested her head briefly against his shoulder. "That I came here asking for shelter," she said, "and somehow the Lord gave me a home." Cole kissed her temple. "Best trade I ever made." She leaned back enough to look at him. "That is a terrible thing to say about a marriage proposal." "It worked." She laughed, full and easy now, and from the next room Ben shouted, "There it is again. Best sound on the ranch." Emma shook her head. "You have created monsters by feeding them." "I suspect you were feeding all of us long before supper." The truth of that settled warm and deep. Later, after the dishes had been stacked and the last lamp turned low and the ranch had gone quiet under its white blanket of snow, Emma stood alone in the kitchen for one final moment. Her kitchen now, their kitchen. The stove glowed softly. The checked curtains stirred with the faintest draft. The table bore scratches from years before her and would bear many more after. Nothing in the room was grand, nothing perfect, and yet it was beautiful. Because it had witnessed everything. Her hunger, her fear, her stubborn beginning, his silence, his laughter, the slow, careful making of trust, the brave return of love. Cole came up behind her then, warm hands settling at her waist. "Mrs. Harper," he said softly, testing the name like a blessing. Emma smiled without turning. "I suppose I shall answer to it." "I hope so. I have grown attached." She leaned back into him, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, winter held the world in stillness. Inside, there was warmth enough for both of them, for memory too, for all the ghosts they would honor and all the joys they had not yet lived. Emma placed her hand over his. A widow had come to this ranch asking only for work. A wife stood here now, loved without being diminished, needed without being owned, and strong enough to laugh in the face of hard seasons. That, she thought, was the truest kind of shelter after all. And in the quiet heart of the Wild West, where loneliness had once sat heavy as stone, Emma and Cole Harper began their new life together the way all lasting things begin. With truth, with tenderness, and with enough laughter to season every meal that came after. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and follow for more emotional Wild West stories.